A hungry black boy gave away his only meal to a lost little girl. But he had no idea that this tiny act of kindness would bring dozens of the billionaire's supercars to his doorstep and change his life forever. Let's continue this story. The first time anyone saw him, he looked like he was invisible, the kind of boy people could walk past without a second glance. But he wasn't invisible. He was surviving. The streets were his world, the sounds of car horns and hurried footsteps his constant companions, and every day was a test of endurance. On this particularly hot afternoon, he sat on the cracked steps outside a small diner, clutching a brown paper bag tightly to his chest. His eyes scanned the passers-by, not with hope, but with a quiet, wary vigilance. He was small, thin, and dressed in a shirt that had seen better decades, but there was a spark in him, a spark that refused to die despite the hunger gnawing at his belly. That spark would soon change everything. A little girl stumbled down the street, her tiny frame shivering despite the blazing sun overhead. She was lost, tears streaking her dusty face, clutching a doll that had seen better days. People walked past her without notice, their minds elsewhere, busy in the urgency of their own lives. But the boy noticed her. Something stirred in him, a mixture of empathy, recognition, and the simple human instinct to care. He tore open the brown paper bag and pulled out the sandwich inside. He hesitated for a moment, a flicker of fear crossing his face. He didn't have much, and he had to ration every bite to survive the rest of the day. But he also saw the girl's desperation, her hunger, her vulnerability. He walked slowly toward her, the sandwich held out in trembling hands. "Here, you can have this," he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. The girl looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. No one had ever offered her anything without asking for something in return. She took the sandwich, her small hands trembling, and looked up at him. There was a moment of connection, unspoken and raw, a shared understanding between two souls who had known hardship far too early in life. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. He smiled faintly, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun overhead. In that instant, something shifted, something that would set off a chain of events neither of them could have imagined. Unbeknownst to either of them, someone had been watching. A tall, elegant woman in her mid-30s, dressed in an outfit that radiated wealth and authority, had parked her sleek car a few blocks away. She had noticed the boy earlier in the week, always sitting in the same spot, always alone, and something about his demeanor had drawn her attention. Today, as she watched him offer his meal to the lost girl, she felt a surge of admiration. She was used to seeing people flaunt their wealth, to see children ignored or pitted. But this boy, this small, ragged boy, had a heart so generous it startled her. Without thinking, she directed her driver to follow them. Curiosity piqued and interest growing into an inexplicable urgency. The boy, unaware of the woman's presence, sat down on the curb beside the girl, keeping a careful distance but making sure she was safe. They shared the sandwich silently, the kind of silence that only the truly understood can share. The girl introduced herself as Lily, her voice hesitant but trusting. The boy simply nodded, introducing himself as Jamal, though his tone suggested that he wasn't used to conversations, much less introductions. They talked in small fragments, about nothing and everything, a world of childhood wonder and struggle mixing together. Jamal learned that Lily had gotten separated from her mother while shopping, and now she had no way to reach home. Jamal's mind raced. He didn't have a phone, didn't know addresses, and barely had money to think about bus fare, let alone a safe way to return her to her family. But he also knew that he couldn't just leave her there. The woman in the expensive car finally decided to intervene. She stepped out of the vehicle, her presence commanding without a word, and approached them cautiously. Jamal instinctively took a small step back, unsure of the intentions behind the sharply tailored suit and the gold watch gleaming in the sunlight. Lily, sensing safety, reached out for Jamal's hand. "It's okay," she whispered. The woman crouched down to Lily's level, speaking gently. "Are you lost? Can I help you get home?" Lily nodded, relief washing over her features. Jamal's heart raced. This was the first time someone had offered real help without expectation. He felt a strange mix of awe, suspicion, and cautious hope. As they spoke, the woman glanced at Jamal, her eyes lingering for a fraction longer than necessary. She didn't just see a boy on the streets. She saw courage, kindness, and integrity, the kind of qualities money couldn't buy. Without a word, she made a decision that would turn Jamal's world upside down. She instructed her driver to follow them both to Lily's home, a lavish mansion on the edge of the city. Jamal had never been inside a house with marble floors, towering ceilings, and gardens so vast it seemed like another world. But the moment wasn't about him. It was about Lily's safety. As they arrived, Lily ran into her mother's arms, crying with relief. Jamal watched from a distance, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over him. The woman stayed behind, her mind racing with possibilities. She couldn't stop thinking about the boy who had given away his meal without hesitation, who had cared for a stranger with a selflessness she had never encountered in the world of luxury and power. She wanted to know more, to understand him, to offer something beyond charity, something that could change his life forever. Little did Jamal know, the simple act of kindness he had performed would soon bring a parade of the most unbelievable wealth to his doorstep, and a life he had never imagined would open up before him like a storybook. The next morning, Jamal woke to the sound of birds chirping and the faint hum of distant traffic, but something felt different. He rubbed his eyes and sat up on the worn mattress that had been his only companion for months. There was a strange feeling in his chest, a fluttering mix of excitement and confusion, like the world had shifted while he slept. At first, he thought it was a dream, the kind of dream where everything feels impossibly real, yet your heart tells you it cannot be true. But as he stepped outside into the narrow alley where he often lingered, he noticed something that made him stop dead in his tracks. Shiny cars. Not just one or two, but dozens of gleaming vehicles lined the street, their engines purring softly. Sports cars with colors so vibrant they almost hurt to look at, limousines that reflected the morning sun in dazzling patterns, and sleek luxury SUVs that made the neighborhood seem like a completely different world. Jamal rubbed his eyes again, sure that he was imagining things. The people on the street had stopped too, staring at the sudden display of wealth with open mouths and whispered conversations. And then, at the center of it all, stepping out of a jet-black Rolls-Royce, was the woman, the same woman who had watched him give away his meal to Lily. Her presence commanded attention without her saying a word, and her eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the small crowd until they rested on Jamal. For a moment, Jamal froze, unsure of whether to run or stay. He had seen rich people in the distance, in advertisements or through shop windows, but never up close, never in his own neighborhood, and certainly not coming straight to him. The woman approached slowly, a calm smile playing on her lips. "Jamal, isn't it?" she asked, her voice warm yet firm. He nodded, speechless, and the surrounding crowd parted instinctively as she drew near. "I watched what you did yesterday," she continued. "Not many people would give away their only meal to a stranger. That kind of heart, it's rare." Jamal's eyes widened. Nobody had ever complimented him like that. Nobody had ever even noticed him. Without warning, she handed him a small card. "I want you to come with me," she said simply. "There's so much I want to show you, Jamal. So many things I want you to experience, things you've never imagined." The words felt surreal. Jamal looked at the card, then back at her, unsure if this was real life or a fantasy spun by his mind. His instincts screamed caution. After all, the world had been unkind to him. But a part of him, the part that had dared to care for a stranger yesterday, whispered that maybe this time, it was different. He swallowed hard and nodded. The ride was unlike anything Jamal had ever experienced. The woman drove, or rather, commanded her driver to take them through the city in one of the fastest cars he had ever seen. The streets blurred past, and Jamal's heart raced with a mix of fear, exhilaration, and awe. He stared at the luxurious leather seats, the dashboard glowing with buttons and screens he didn't understand, and the windows so large he felt like he could touch the clouds. It was dizzying, overwhelming, and yet exciting in a way he couldn't describe. "Where are we going?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled enigmatically. "Somewhere you'll understand. Somewhere you belong." When they arrived, Jamal's jaw nearly dropped. The mansion was massive, with towering gates, a fountain that sparkled under the sunlight, and gardens that stretched farther than his eyes could see. Supercars lined the driveway, each one more impressive than the last. The air smelled of fresh flowers and polished metal, and there was a quiet elegance that made him feel both small and strangely important at the same time. "This is yours?" he asked, incredulously, though he knew in his heart it couldn't be. The woman laughed softly, shaking her head. "Not yet, Jamal. Today isn't about ownership. Today is about possibilities. Today is about showing you that the world can be bigger, kinder, and more extraordinary than you've ever imagined." As they walked inside, Jamal's eyes roamed over the grand staircase, the crystal chandeliers, and the art that lined the walls. Every corner of the mansion spoke of wealth, taste, and influence, but what struck him the most was the warmth of the woman's attention. She guided him to a cozy room with books, games, and computers, saying, "This is your space. A place where you can dream, learn, and be safe. I want you to have the chance to explore who you are, Jamal, without worrying about surviving every single day." His heart swelled. For years, all he had thought about was food, shelter, and staying alive. Now, someone was giving him the freedom to think beyond survival, to imagine a life filled with opportunity, hope, and even joy. Later that day, as the woman watched Jamal tentatively explore the mansion, she decided it was time for a little surprise. She called in the staff and coordinated a small event that would blow his mind. Within the hour, dozens of the supercars that had initially lined the driveway were driven around the property, their owners, business partners, friends, and enthusiasts of her network, invited to see this boy whose heart had moved her so deeply. Jamal stood in the doorway, mouth open, as engines roared and shiny cars filled the gardens, their owners waving, honking, and laughing. "What is all this?" he asked, utterly dumbfounded. The woman smiled. "This, Jamal, is just the beginning. It's not the cars, the wealth, or the fame that matters. It's the opportunity to dream big and to make a difference, just like you did yesterday." As the sun set, casting a golden glow across the estate, Jamal felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. A tiny seed had been planted in his heart, one that promised growth, change, and possibility. The boy who had once sat on the street, invisible and unnoticed, was now at the center of attention for reasons he never imagined. And though he didn't yet know the full extent of the journey ahead, one thing was certain: his life had changed forever, all because of a simple act of kindness he had offered without expecting anything in return. The first few days in the mansion were nothing short of a whirlwind for Jamal. Every corner, every room, every glimmering object seemed to tell a story of wealth he had never seen, let alone imagined. At first, he wandered through the halls cautiously, as though afraid that touching something expensive might break it, or worse, get him in trouble. But the woman, whose name he learned was Veronica, watched him patiently, letting him acclimate at his own pace. She didn't rush him, didn't overwhelm him with lectures about etiquette or rules. Instead, she encouraged curiosity, rewarded questions, and allowed him to explore the mansion as he wished. It was the first time in his life that he felt trusted, that someone believed in his judgment, however small, however tentative. One afternoon, Veronica led Jamal to a sunlit study filled with books stacked from floor to ceiling. She pulled out a chair for him and said, "This is where you can learn anything you want, Jamal. Math, science, literature, even music or art. Everything you've ever been curious about is here for you." Jamal's eyes widened, and for a moment, he didn't speak. Books had always been intimidating, filled with words he couldn't always understand, but now they seemed like keys to a whole new world. Tentatively, he picked one up, a thick book about famous inventors, and leafed through the pages. Veronica watched him closely, smiling softly as she noticed the spark of excitement growing in his eyes. For the first time, learning didn't feel like a chore. It felt like a privilege, a gift. But even in this new world of luxury, Jamal couldn't ignore the streets he had left behind. Memories of cold nights, empty stomachs, and the friends he had lost to harsh realities lingered in his mind. Veronica noticed his distant gaze more than once and asked him gently, "Are you thinking about home?" He nodded, hesitating. I just wonder about the people I left behind. My friends, the ones who aren't as lucky." His voice trailed off. Veronica put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We're not here to erase your past, Jamal. We're here to give you the chance to build a future. And we can help the people you care about too, when the time is right." That idea comforted him more than anything else. The days turned into weeks, and Jamal began to adapt to his new life. He learned to drive one of the supercars under Veronica's careful supervision, a skill he never imagined he would acquire. He discovered his knack for strategy and numbers when he helped her review some charity initiatives she managed, and she was astonished by his intelligence and quick thinking. But beyond the learning and the luxury, what mattered most to Veronica was Jamal's heart. She often reminded him, "Never let wealth change who you are. Remember the kindness you showed yesterday, the courage it took to care for someone else even when you had nothing." And Jamal remembered, because it was his guiding light, the one thing that had brought him to this unimaginable reality. One day, Veronica invited Jamal to attend a charity gala with her, an event filled with wealthy donors, celebrities, and philanthropists. Jamal was nervous at first, unsure how to behave among people whose lives were so different from his own. But as the evening unfolded, something incredible happened. The very qualities that had made him extraordinary in Veronica's eyes, the humility, the compassion, the genuine curiosity, captured the attention of everyone he met. People were drawn to him, not because of his proximity to wealth, but because of the sincerity and authenticity he exuded. He realized then that true respect couldn't be bought. It was earned, one gesture, one word, one act of courage at a time. Even with all the attention and luxury, Jamal remained grounded. One afternoon, he returned to Veronica with an idea that had been growing in his mind. "I want to help kids like me," he said earnestly. Veronica's eyes lit up with pride. "Then let's do it," she replied. Together, they began planning initiatives to provide meals, education, and safe spaces for children living in poverty. Jamal's experiences gave him insight no wealth could buy, and Veronica's resources gave them the power to make tangible change. The boy who had once given away his only sandwich to a lost girl was now on a mission to impact dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of lives. Through it all, Jamal and Veronica formed a bond that transcended wealth, status, or age. She became a mentor, a guide, and, in some ways, the mother figure he had been missing for so long. And Veronica, for her part, discovered something she hadn't expected. The boy's courage, honesty, and heart were teaching her as much about life as she was teaching him. They laughed together, brainstormed together, and even argued at times, but every moment strengthened their connection. Veronica often marveled at how someone so small, so seemingly fragile, could possess such resilience, such wisdom, such an innate understanding of right and wrong. One evening, after a long day of planning and learning, Jamal sat quietly in the mansion's garden, reflecting on his journey. He thought about the lost girl on the street, the sandwich he had offered, and the moment Veronica had first approached him. If he hadn't shared that simple act of kindness, would he be here now? Would his life have remained a cycle of hunger and struggle? He realized that sometimes, the smallest gestures, an offered sandwich, a helping hand, a word of comfort, could set off a chain reaction powerful enough to change the course of a life. And perhaps, he thought, that was the lesson he was meant to carry forward. As the stars began to twinkle above, Jamal felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the wealth, the mansion, or the cars, but for the opportunity to be part of something bigger than himself, for the chance to live a life guided by compassion, courage, and purpose. And as he looked across the illuminated estate, the rows of supercars, and the endless possibilities that lay ahead, he knew one thing with certainty. The boy who once lived unnoticed on the streets was no longer invisible. He had a voice, a mission, and a heart that would continue to inspire everyone around him. Despite the warmth, the opportunities, and the excitement of his new life, Jamal quickly realized that living in a world of wealth wasn't always as simple as it seemed. At first, the mansion had felt like a sanctuary, a place where he could explore, learn, and grow. But as days turned into weeks, he began to notice the pressures, expectations, and subtle judgments that came with privilege. Not everyone welcomed him with open arms. Some people looked at him suspiciously, questioning why a street kid was suddenly walking into their glamorous events, sitting at tables filled with influential figures, and handling responsibilities that had once seemed impossible. The whispers stung more than he expected, and for the first time, Jamal felt the weight of self-doubt pressing against him. One afternoon, Veronica invited him to a board meeting for one of her charitable foundations. He was eager to learn and contribute, but as he stepped into the room, he immediately sensed the skepticism. Men and women in expensive suits exchanged glances, some smirking, some raising eyebrows. Who was this kid? Jamal heard someone whisper. He felt a tight knot form in his stomach. Veronica, however, walked in beside him and introduced him with confidence. This is Jamal. He's the inspiration behind our newest initiative. I trust him, and I hope you will too. Jamal nodded politely, but inside, the anxiety churned. Could he really belong here? Could he hold his own among people who had been navigating wealth and influence their whole lives? The first few minutes were awkward. He stumbled over words when presenting his ideas, faltered when asked questions he didn't immediately know the answers to, and felt the skeptical gazes piercing him like daggers. But then, something remarkable happened. Veronica's reassuring smile reminded him of the boy he had been, the boy who had shared his sandwich without hesitation, who had faced fear and hunger with courage. And that boy still existed inside him. He took a deep breath, gathered his thoughts, and spoke from the heart. Instead of relying on polished words or technical jargon, he shared his experiences, the struggles of children living in poverty, and the vision he had for creating real change. The room fell silent. Slowly, heads began to nod. Questions followed, but Jamal answered with honesty, clarity, and passion. By the end, the skepticism had turned into admiration. People were not just impressed by his story, they were inspired by his courage, his insight, and his determination. Yet the challenges didn't stop at boardrooms or social events. Back at the mansion, Jamal had to navigate a life filled with luxuries that felt foreign. Private chefs prepared meals unlike anything he had tasted. Staff members attended to his needs, offering him clothing, guidance, and advice. At first, he struggled with the etiquette, the routines, and even the seemingly endless rules of this world. Simple things like using fine cutlery, dressing appropriately for dinner, or understanding financial discussions became hurdles he had to overcome. Sometimes he felt overwhelmed, frustrated, or out of place. But Veronica never criticized. She encouraged, guided, and reminded him that mistakes were part of learning and that adapting to a new life was a journey, not a race. As he became more comfortable in the mansion, Jamal's attention also returned to the streets he had left behind. He remembered the friends he had lost, the kids still struggling, the families barely surviving. Veronica noticed this focus and said, "You have a gift, Jamal. Your experiences give you perspective, empathy, and understanding that others in this world often lack. Use it wisely." Inspired, Jamal began planning a series of community initiatives with Veronica, from feeding programs to after-school education. He realized that the wealth and influence he had access to were tools, not for personal indulgence, but for creating meaningful change. He felt a sense of purpose he had never known, a responsibility to use his new life as a platform to help those still living in hardship. But even with noble intentions, Jamal faced resistance. Some of the community leaders and wealthy donors doubted a boy from the streets could manage projects of such scale. Rumors spread that he was inexperienced, naive, or merely a figurehead to make Veronica look generous. Jamal felt the sting of doubt, but remembered the lessons that had brought him here: courage, integrity, and kindness. Instead of giving in to fear, he worked harder, studied longer, and listened carefully to advice while remaining true to his vision. Slowly, results began to show. Children received meals, schools received resources, and families found hope. Each success strengthened his confidence, and even the most skeptical began to respect him. One evening, after a long day coordinating projects, Jamal and Veronica stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The sunset painted the skyline in fiery oranges and pinks, and a gentle breeze carried the distant sounds of life below. Veronica looked at Jamal, her eyes filled with pride. "You've come a long way, Jamal," she said softly. He looked out at the horizon, thinking about the journey from the street corners where he had sat alone to this very moment. I just want to make a difference," he admitted. "That's all I ever wanted." Veronica smiled. "And you are, every single day? Remember, it's not about the mansion, the cars, or the events. It's about the impact you're making with the heart you never lost." In that moment, Jamal realized that life was not defined by wealth, status, or fame, but by courage, compassion, and perseverance. The boy who once gave his meal to a lost girl had grown into a young man capable of inspiring communities, challenging perceptions, and creating opportunities for those who had none. And while he still faced challenges, doubts, and obstacles, he had learned that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple into something far greater than he had ever imagined. The world he had entered was dazzling, complex, and sometimes unforgiving. But Jamal had discovered that with heart, determination, and guidance, he could navigate it with grace and purpose. Time passed, and Jamal's life continued to evolve in ways he could never have imagined. The boy who had once walked the streets alone, hungry and unnoticed, was now a symbol of hope, not just for children like him, but for everyone who had ever doubted the power of a single act of kindness. Yet despite the wealth, the mansion, and the opportunities, Jamal never forgot where he came from. Every morning, he rose with a determination to make a difference, to ensure that the children who had no voice would be heard, and that the forgotten streets he once called home would not be abandoned to despair. One bright morning, Veronica surprised Jamal with a trip that would forever change his understanding of impact. She had arranged a visit to one of the neighborhoods where Jamal had spent his earliest years. As they arrived, Jamal's heart ached and swelled all at once. The streets were narrow and crowded, the buildings worn but vibrant with life, and children ran barefoot through alleys, laughing despite the hardships. Jamal recognized faces, familiar from memories long buried, and his chest tightened with nostalgia and compassion. Veronica parked the car, and the two stepped out. Jamal felt nervous, unsure how the people would receive him, yet something deep inside told him he was exactly where he was meant to be. Word spread quickly that Jamal had returned, and soon a crowd gathered, their eyes filled with curiosity and awe. Children, some no older than he had been, ran toward him, recognizing the boy who had grown into a man who cared. Parents, initially cautious, soon approached, shaking his hand and expressing gratitude for what he and Veronica had begun to accomplish. Jamal realized then that this wasn't just a visit, it was a homecoming. The streets he had once roamed in fear were now buzzing with hope, powered by the simple truth that someone believed in change, and that change had started with him. Veronica watched silently, a proud smile playing on her lips as Jamal interacted naturally with the community. He laughed with the children, listened to the stories of struggle from parents, and offered advice, encouragement, and solutions. The transformation was remarkable, not just for the neighborhood, but for Jamal himself. He no longer felt like an outsider, unsure of his place. He had become a bridge between two worlds, the streets that shaped him, and the world of wealth and opportunity that he now navigated with confidence and purpose. Later that day, as the sun began to dip behind the city skyline, a convoy of sleek cars arrived in the neighborhood. Jamal's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. Dozens of Veronica's supercars had rolled into the streets, each carrying supplies, educational tools, meals, and volunteers ready to lend a hand. The neighborhood erupted in excitement and disbelief. Children cheered, parents clapped, and Jamal felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He remembered the first time he had given away his sandwich, unsure if it would even make a difference. And now, that single act had created ripples that reached further than he could have ever imagined. As the day drew to a close, Jamal and Veronica stood together, watching the community transform before their eyes. Streets that had been quiet and neglected were now alive with activity, laughter, and hope. Families received assistance, children received meals and supplies, and the spirit of possibility filled the air. Jamal realized that the power of kindness was not limited to one moment, one gesture, or one person. It was a force that could grow, multiply, and reshape lives when fueled by compassion, determination, and love. Veronica turned to him, her eyes shining. "You've done something incredible, Jamal. You didn't just change your life. You've changed the lives of countless others." Jamal smiled, the weight of the journey settling in his chest. "It all started with a sandwich," he said softly. Veronica laughed, shaking her head. "Sometimes, the smallest acts have the biggest impact. You've proven that." In the weeks and months that followed, Jamal continued to expand his initiatives. Schools were rebuilt, community centers opened, and mentorship programs began to thrive. Word of his efforts spread, inspiring others to contribute and take action. He became a living testament to the truth that courage, kindness, and integrity could break through barriers that wealth and privilege alone could never touch. And through it all, he never lost the humility, the empathy, and the heart that had first drawn Veronica to him. Years later, Jamal would look back on the day he shared his meal with a lost girl and realize how pivotal that moment had been. It was the spark that ignited a chain reaction, transforming not only his life but the lives of hundreds, perhaps thousands, around him. He had gone from being an invisible boy on a street corner to a young man who commanded respect, inspired hope, and embodied the belief that one person's courage could change the world. And as he stood once more in the mansion's garden, the sunset painting the sky in brilliant hues, he whispered to himself the lesson he would never forget. Greatness isn't measured by wealth or fame. It's measured by the kindness you give, the courage you show, and the lives you touch. Jamal's journey was proof that even the smallest acts, like giving away a meal, could set off a chain of miracles. The lost girl he helped that day had unknowingly changed his destiny, and in turn, he had changed countless destinies of others. The boy who had once been invisible now shone as a beacon of hope, proving that no act of kindness is ever wasted, and that true wealth lies not in possessions, but in the heart. And in that moment, Jamal knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, ready to continue the work his heart had called him to from the very beginning. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe now for more unbelievable stories that inspire, shock, and move the soul. Don't miss the next life-changing story.